The ceramic plate nearly slipped from my trembling hands as I stood alone in my son's garage, surrounded by garden tools and half-empty paint cans. The smell of motor oil, mingling with my carefully prepared turkey and stuffing. I was 68 years old, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't good enough to sit at my own family's Thanksgiving tableau table I had sanded and stained with these very hands 35 years ago. I hadn't made a scene when my daughter-in-law Melissa suggested I might be more comfortable eating out here, because the dining room was just so crowded with Jason's work colleagues. I simply nodded, took my plate, and walked out the kitchen door into the November chill. The kitchen door that hung in the frame I had measured and cut myself when Jason was just a boy playing with Legos at my feet. The truth was, I'd been slowly vanishing from my son's life ever since Melissa came into the picture 5 years ago. It started with small things, suggestions that my cooking was a bit old-fashioned, hints that my weekly visits were disrupting their routine, comments about how my grandparenting style was outdated, but being banished to the garage on Thanksgiving while strangers enjoyed the feast I had helped prepare that was the final insult. I set my plate down on a workbench next to a framed photo of Jason and me standing proudly in front of this very house on the day I handed him the keys. My late husband Frank had left enough insurance money for a modest down payment, but the house needed extensive renovations. With no money to hire contractors, I'd done most of the work myself over 2 years, learning from library books and the kind older gentleman at the hardware store who never once suggested I couldn't do it because I was a woman in my 50s. I picked up the photo, wiping dust from the glass with my thumb. In it, my son's arm was draped around my shoulder, both of us beaming with pride at what we'd accomplished together. I'd spent hundreds of hours installing drywall, laying tile, and hanging cabinets in that kitchen, the kitchen where I now wasn't welcome to enjoy a family meal. A sudden knock on the garage door startled me. My 8-year-old granddaughter Lily peeked in, her eyes wide with confusion. "Grandma, why are you eating out here all alone?" I quickly wiped away a tear and smiled. "Oh, just getting some peace and quiet, sweetie." Lily frowned, her brow furrowing in that serious way that reminded me of her father as a child. "Mom said you'd be more comfortable out here, but it's cold and it smells funny, and you look sad." Children have a way of seeing through adult pretenses. I patted the stool beside me. "Well, I am a little sad, but I'm okay." Lily climbed up and peered at my barely touched plate. "You made the best stuffing. Dad says nobody makes stuffing like yours." She looked up at the photograph I was still holding. "Is that when you gave Dad the house?" "That's right," I said, surprised she knew about that. "After your grandpa died, I fixed up this house for your dad." "Dad told me you built the whole kitchen yourself," Lily said, her voice filled with awe. "He said you're the strongest person he knows." My heart ached at the contradiction. If Jason truly thought that, how could he allow his mother to be treated this way? "Lily, what are you doing out here?" Melissa appeared in the doorway, her designer, sweater, and perfect makeup a stark contrast to the cluttered garage. "Come back inside, honey. Everyone's having dessert." "But Grandma's out here all by herself," Lily protested. "Margaret is fine," Melissa said, not quite meeting my eyes. "She wanted some quiet time." "No, I didn't," I said softly, surprising myself with the calm clarity of my voice. "I never said that." Melissa's smile faltered. "Well, it's just really crowded inside, and we thought—" "You thought an old woman would embarrass you in front of your friends. I finished for her. I understand." "That's not," Melissa began, but Lily interrupted. "Dad says Grandma built our kitchen with her own hands. She shouldn't have to eat in the garage." Melissa's face flushed. "Lily, go inside now, please." After Lily reluctantly left, Melissa turned to me with a tight smile. "Margaret, please don't make this difficult. Jason and I have worked hard to build relationships with these people. They're important for his career. And I'm not important. The words hung in the cold air between us. That's not what I meant, Melissa sighed. It's just one dinner. I don't understand why you're making such a big deal out of this. I set down the photograph and stood up straighter. Because I've spent the last 5 years shrinking myself to fit into smaller and smaller spaces in my son's life. And now I'm literally in the garage while strangers sit in the kitchen I built. You didn't build it for yourself though, did you? Melissa said, her voice taking on a harder edge. You built it for Jason. And now it's our house, our kitchen. We get to decide how we use it and who we invite to our table. Her words hit me like a physical blow. I had indeed built it for Jason, but never imagined I'd be considered an outsider in the space I'd created with so much love. I see, I said quietly. Thank you for clarifying where I stand. Melissa seemed relieved by my apparent surrender. I'm glad you understand. Maybe next year we can do something smaller, just family. After she left, I sat alone in the garage for a long time, my food growing cold. Through the window, I could see people laughing and talking in the kitchen, their figures blurred by the tears in my eyes and the gathering darkness outside. That night in my small apartment, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Frank and how disappointed he would be to see his son treating his mother this way. I thought about the kitchen I had built, the careful measurements, the sore muscles, the pride of creation. I thought about Lily's innocent question. Why was her grandmother eating alone in the garage? Why indeed? The answer came to me as the first light of dawn crept through my curtains, because I had allowed it. I had surrendered my dignity inch by inch, retreating from confrontation, making myself smaller to accommodate Melissa's apparent discomfort with my presence. Frank wouldn't have stood for it, and neither should I. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my old friend Diane, who had been a real estate agent for over 30 years. Diane, remember when you told me I should have put my name on the deed when I gave Jason the house? Well, I've been thinking about that conversation. Oh, Margaret, Diane said, her voice full of concern. What's happened? I told her about Thanksgiving, about the garage, about the slow erosion of my place in my son's life. That's terrible, Margaret, but I'm not sure what I can do now. The house is in Jason's name. Yes, but the kitchen isn't, I said firmly. What do you mean? I mean, when I renovated that house, I paid for all the materials myself. I kept every receipt. I did all the labor except for the electrical work. And I never officially gifted the kitchen to Jason, just the house. Diane was quiet for a moment. Margaret, I'm not sure that would hold up legally. When you renovate a house, I'm not talking about legal ownership, Diane. I'm talking about moral ownership. That kitchen is mine in every way that matters, and I think it's time I reminded my son of that fact. After speaking with Diane, I spent the day gathering old photographs, receipts, and journals I'd kept during the renovation. I found the original sketches I'd made for the kitchen layout, the paint color samples, even the handwritten notes from the kind hardware store clerk with advice on installing cabinet hinges. That evening, I called Jason. He sounded surprised to hear from me so soon after Thanksgiving. Mom, is everything okay? No, Jason, it's not, I said calmly. We need to talk about yesterday. Oh, that. His voice immediately took on a defensive tone. Look, I know it wasn't ideal, but Melissa was stressed about having so many people over and… I'd like to meet with you, I interrupted. Just you. Tomorrow at the cafe near my apartment, 3 o'clock. There was a pause. Mom, I have meetings all afternoon. This is important, Jason. 3 o'clock. I hung up before he could make another excuse. The next day, to my surprise, Jason showed up at the cafe. He looked harried and checked his watch as he sat down across from me. I can only stay for 20 minutes, Mom. What's this about? I opened the folder I'd brought and placed a photograph in front of him, the two of us standing proudly in front of the house. Do you remember this day? Jason's expression softened slightly. Of course I do, when you gave me the house. I nodded and placed another photo on the table. May in overalls, covered in drywall dust, smiling tiredly at the camera. And this one? When you were renovating, Jason said. Mom, I know you worked really hard on that house, and I've always been grateful. Grateful enough to make me eat in the garage on Thanksgiving? I asked quietly. Jason had the grace to look ashamed. That wasn't my idea, Melissa thought. I don't care whose idea it was, I said. You allowed it to happen. I laid out more photos, me installing cabinets, tiling the backsplash, painting the walls. Then I showed him my old journals, with detailed accounts of each day's work. I spent 723 hours on that kitchen alone. I said, I saved you over $30,000 in contractor fees. I put my heart and soul into creating a space where our family could gather and share meals together. Jason was silent, staring at the evidence of my labor spread out on the cafe table. I never formally gifted you the kitchen, Jason. I gave you the house, yes, but the kitchen? That kitchen is mine. I built it with my own hands, and yesterday you and Melissa made it clear that I'm not welcome in it. Mom, that's not. I want it back, I said simply. Jason's jaw dropped. What? The kitchen. I want it back. You can't be serious. Jason looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. You can't just take a kitchen out of a house. I can remove what I built, I said evenly. The cabinets, the island, the tile work, all of it. I've already spoken with a contractor who specializes in salvaging materials from renovations. He said most of it can be carefully removed and reinstalled elsewhere. This is insane, Jason said, his voice rising. Several cafe patrons glanced our way. Where would you even put it? I've been thinking of buying a small house, something I can manage in my retirement, and I'd like to have my kitchen in it. Mom, be reasonable, Jason pleaded. You're talking about gutting our kitchen over one bad Thanksgiving. No, Jason, I'm talking about reclaiming my dignity. That kitchen represents hundreds of hours of my life, thousands of dollars from my savings, and countless sacrifices I made as a widow raising a son alone. And yesterday, I was told I'm not good enough to sit in it. Jason ran his hands through his hair in frustration. What do you want from me, Mom? An apology? Fine, I'm sorry. Melissa is sorry too. It won't happen again. I want more than words, Jason. I want respect. I want acknowledgement of what I've contributed to your life. And I want my rightful place at the table I built, not just on Thanksgiving, but any day I choose to visit my son and grandchildren. And if I say no, if I refuse to let you take apart our kitchen, I closed my folder and looked him directly in the eyes. Then, I'll see you in court. I have every receipt, every photograph, every journal entry documenting my work. I never signed anything saying I was giving you the kitchen. Legally, I may have a claim, but more importantly, I have the truth on my side. How do you think it will look when people hear that you made your elderly mother eat Thanksgiving dinner in the garage, in the very house she renovated for you? Jason's face paled. You wouldn't do that. I never thought my son would let me eat in the garage while strangers sat at my table, I replied softly. We've both been surprised lately. For the first time in years, Jason really looked at Minot as an inconvenient obligation or a relic from his past, but as the strong woman who had raised him alone, who had literally built the roof over his head. What exactly are you asking for, Mom? He finally said. I want a key to the house, I said. I want standing permission to use the kitchen anytime I want. I want to be included in family gatherings not as an afterthought, but as an honored guest. And I want you to tell Melissa that these things are non-negotiable. Jason was quiet for a long moment. And if I agree to these terms, you won't dismantle our kitchen? The kitchen stays where it is, I confirmed, but only if I'm welcomed back into it. Jason nodded slowly. I'll talk to Melissa. No, I said firmly. You'll tell Melissa. This isn't up for debate. As Jason left the cafe, I wasn't sure if I'd just salvaged my relationship with my son or severed it completely. But for the first time in years, I felt the strength that had carried me through widowhood, through raising a child alone, through building a kitchen with my own 2 hands. 3 days passed with no word from Jason. I began to think I'd miscalculated, that he valued Melissa's comfort more than his relationship with me. I started researching small houses for sale, wondering if I really could reclaim my kitchen and install it somewhere new. Then, on the 4th day, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Jason stood there, looking uncomfortable but determined. Behind him was Lily, bouncing on her toes with excitement, and behind her, reluctantly emerging from the car parked at the curb, was Melissa. Mom, Jason said, holding out a small box. We'd like you to come to dinner tonight. I opened the box. Inside was a house key, shiny and new, with a note attached. The kitchen builder always has a place at our table. Grandma! Lily burst out, unable to contain herself any longer. Dad showed us all the pictures of you building our kitchen. You look like a superhero in overalls. And he said you know how to use all the tools in the garage better than anyone. I looked at Jason, who nodded slightly. I've been telling them stories about how you built everything, things I'd forgotten to mention before. Melissa stepped forward, not quite meeting my eyes. We'd be honored if you'd come to dinner tonight, Margaret, in the kitchen you built. I could see this wasn't easy for her. Her body language was stiff, her smile forced, but she was here and that was a start. I'd like that, I said. And maybe afterward, I could show Lily how to properly measure for cabinet handles. There's a skill that might come in handy someday. Yes, Lily exclaimed. Mom says I can help Grandma make cookies in our kitchen whenever she visits now. Melissa's smile became slightly more genuine. We thought maybe you could teach us both. I never learned much about cooking growing up. As I stepped out of my apartment, key in hand, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The kitchen I built would remain where it was, but so would I, firmly reinstated in my son's life and home. That evening, as we sat around the table in the kitchen I had created, I looked at the space with fresh eyes. The cabinets I'd installed needed a good polishing. The grout between the tiles could use a proper cleaning. The walls could do with a fresh coat of paint. Jason, I said, setting down my fork, I think it's time we gave this kitchen a little refresh. What do you say we spend a weekend fixing it up, just like old times? The surprise and gratitude in my son's eyes told me everything I needed to know. Sometimes, you have to be willing to tear something down to build it back stronger, whether it's a kitchen or a relationship. As for Melissa, she watched our exchange with newfound respect in her eyes. I had shown her that this 68-year-old woman wasn't fading quietly into the background. I was still building, still creating, still claiming my rightful place at the table. And no one would ever suggest I eat in the garage again. Artifact. This is the first part of your story about a mother who reclaims her dignity after being made to eat Thanksgiving dinner in the garage. I've followed the guidelines for creating a compelling narrative, featuring an older female protagonist who stands up for herself. 3 months after that pivotal Thanksgiving, I stood in my son's kitchen with a paintbrush in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other, surveying our weekend's work. Jason and I had spent 2 full days stripping and refinishing the cabinets, replacing the worn hardware, and applying a fresh coat of warm butter yellow paint to the walls. The kitchen looked brighter, just as I felt brighter these days. What do you think, Mom? Jason asked, wiping his hands on a rag. There was a smudge of paint on his cheek that made him look like the boy who used to help me with projects around our old house. "I think it looks like home again," I said, not bothering to hide the emotion in my voice. Jason nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind my words. In the months since our confrontation at the cafe, things had changed dramatically. True to his word, Jason had made it clear to Melissa that I was to be welcomed in their homier home at any time. The key he'd given me wasn't just symbolic, I'd used it several times. Sometimes dropping by to help Lily with homework, or to leave a homemade casserole in the refrigerator when I knew they had a busy week ahead. Melissa and I had reached an uneasy truce at first. She was polite but distant, clearly struggling to adjust to my renewed presence in their lives. But something unexpected had happened over these past months. We'd started to find common ground. It began when Melissa sheepishly admitted she'd never learned to cook properly. Her mother had been a career-focused woman who relied on takeout and prepared meals. Melissa had followed in her footsteps, seeing cooking as an outdated skill rather than a form of nurturing or creativity. "Would you teach me?" she'd asked one evening, after complimenting my lasagna for the third time. "I'd like to be able to make meals like this for Jason and the kids." And so our cooking lessons began awkward at first, then gradually more comfortable as we found ourselves laughing over kitchen disasters and small triumphs. I taught her my recipes, yes, but more importantly, I showed her how cooking could be an expression of love, a way to bring family together. "Earth to Mom," Jason said, waving a hand in front of my face. "You disappeared for a minute there." I smiled, coming back to the present, just thinking about how far we've come. "We have, haven't we?" Jason looked around the refreshed kitchen, then back at me. "I'm sorry it took something so dramatic to wake me up." "Well, threatening to dismantle your kitchen tends to get attention," I replied with a wink. Jason laughed, but then grew serious. "Would you really have done it, taken the kitchen apart?" I considered the question. "I don't know, honestly. But I was desperate enough to try anything that might make you see me, again really see me, not just as an obligation or an inconvenience, but as your mother, as someone who deserves respect." Jason was quiet for a moment. "I never meant to make you feel invisible, Mom. I got caught up in trying to please Melissa, in building my career, in juggling everything. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what you'd sacrificed for me." "We all make mistakes," I said, patting his arm. "What matters is how we fix them." The front door opened and we heard Lily's excited voice followed by Melissa's calmer tones as they returned from grocery shopping. "We're back," Lily called, running into the kitchen. She stopped short, her eyes widening as she took in the transformed space. "Wow, it looks amazing!" Melissa appeared behind her, carrying grocery bags. Her gaze traveled around the kitchen, and I could see genuine appreciation in her eyes. "It's beautiful," she said softly. I never realized how dingy it had gotten until seeing it now. "Nothing a little elbow grease couldn't fix," I said, taking some of the bags from her. "Just like most things in life." Melissa gave me a knowing look. We both understood I wasn't just talking about the kitchen. As we unpacked the groceries together, I marveled at how natural it felt now, this collaboration, this sharing of space. The four of us moved around each other comfortably, putting away food, wiping down the last few spots of paint, laughing about Jason's disastrous attempt to bake cookies the previous weekend. "Margaret," Melissa said suddenly, "I've been thinking, Mother's Day is coming up next month, and we'd like to host a special dinner. Would you help me plan the menu?" I was touched by the gesture, but something in her phrasing caught my attention. "That sounds lovely. Who will we be celebrating?" Melissa hesitated, then said, "Well, me, of course, and you." "Me?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yes, you." Melissa took a deep breath. "You're a mother too, Jason's mother, and And you've been motherly to me these past few months, teaching me things my own mother never did. So yes, we'll be celebrating both of us. I had to turn away briefly to hide the tears that sprang to my eyes. This recognition, this inclusion was what I had been fighting for all along. The following weekend, I was at my apartment organizing my sewing supplies when my phone rang. It was Diana, my friend who had advised me during the kitchen confrontation. Margaret, I was just thinking about you. How are things going with Jason and Melissa? I filled her in on the positive changes, the kitchen renovation, and the upcoming Mother's Day dinner. That's wonderful, Diana said. I have to admit, I was worried when you threatened to take back the kitchen. It seemed so drastic. Sometimes drastic is necessary, I replied. When you've been slowly disappearing from your own family's life, you need to do something dramatic to reappear. True enough, Diana agreed. Speaking of drastic measures, I'm calling because I have an interesting proposition for you. Remember Betty from my church group? The one whose husband passed away last year? Of course. Betty was a quiet woman in her 70s who had always seemed completely dependent on her husband. Since his death, she'd been struggling to manage on her own. Well, she's finally decided to sell that big old house of hers and move into something smaller. The problem is, the house needs a lot of work before it can go on the market. Nothing major, just updates to make it more appealing to buyers. When I mentioned your renovation skills, she asked if you might be willing to consult. I hesitated. I don't know, Diana. I'm not a professional contractor. No, but you know more than most professionals I've met, Diana countered. And Betty needs someone patient who won't take advantage of her. Just meet with her, that's all I'm asking. See if you can give her some advice. That was how. The following Tuesday, I found myself standing in Betty's outdated kitchen, which hadn't been touched since the 1970s. Harvest gold appliances, dark wood cabinets, and linoleum flooring that had seen better days. It's hopeless, isn't it? Betty said, wringing her hands. Roger always handled everything to do with the house. I don't even know where to begin. I recognized that lost look in her eyes, the same one I'd had after Frank died, when I suddenly had to figure out how to manage everything on my own. It's not hopeless at all, I assured her. In fact, with some relatively simple updates, this kitchen could be quite appealing. Really? Betty looked doubtful. Absolutely. These cabinets are solid wood, much better quality than what they put in new houses these days. They just need refinishing, not replacing. And this layout is actually quite functional. As I walked Betty through the potential changes, pointing out what could stay and what should go, I felt a familiar excitement building. This was what I loved, seeing the potential in a space, imagining how it could be transformed. The thing is, Betty said hesitantly, I don't think I can afford to hire a contractor for all this work. You might not need to, I replied. Some of these updates you could do yourself, with a little help. Betty laughed nervously. Me? I've never even used a power tool in my life. Neither had I until I was 55, I told her. After my husband died, I taught myself. If I could do it, so can you. Over the next few weeks, I found myself spending more and more time at Betty's house. What had started as a simple consultation had evolved into something more, a friendship, a mentorship, and a project that gave us both purpose. I showed Betty how to sand cabinets, how to use a drill, how to measure precisely for new hardware. Other women from Diana's church group began to join us on weekend work days. There was Ruth, recently divorced at 63 and living alone for the first time. Helen, whose adult children had moved across the country, leaving her with too much time and too little purpose. And Maria, whose retirement from teaching had left her restless and searching for meaning. Our little renovation crew, all women over 60, tackled Betty's kitchen with enthusiasm if not always skill. There were mistakes and do-overs, paint spills and crooked cabinet doors. But there was also laughter, shared lunches, and the growing confidence that comes from creating something with your own hands. One Saturday, as we were taking a break, eating sandwiches in Betty's half-finished kitchen, Ruth said thoughtfully, "You know, my bathroom faucet has been leaking for months. My ex-husband always took care of that sort of thing. I've been too embarrassed to call a plumber for something so small." "I can show you how to fix that," I offered. "It's usually just a matter of replacing a washer." "Would you?" Ruth's face lit up. "And maybe you could look at my kitchen too. The cabinets are falling apart, but I can't afford new ones." Maria chimed in, "My guest room has needed painting for years. I've just been closing the door and ignoring it." As the women talked, each revealing home projects they'd been avoiding or postponing, I had a sudden insight. These weren't just tasks they couldn't do. They were symbols of the ways these women had been made to feel incapable, dependent, or irrelevant as they aged. "What if," I said slowly, "we did this regularly? Not just for Betty, but for each of us, a sort of renovation club. We could meet every weekend at someone's house and tackle a project together." The idea took hold immediately. Helen suggested we could each contribute a small amount to a materials fund. Maria offered to create a schedule. Betty, who had been the quietest of the group, surprised us all by saying, "We should have a name, something that shows we're not just little old ladies." "How about the Renovation Rebels?" Ruth suggested with a laugh. "Or the Power Tool Posse," added Maria. We settled on the Wise Women Builders, a name that acknowledged both our age and our newfound skills. By the end of that lunch break, we had a plan, a schedule, and a new sense of excitement. That evening, when I returned home, I called Jason to tell him about the new group. To my surprise, he was enthusiastic rather than concerned about his 68-year-old mother wielding power tools. "Mom, that's fantastic. You should document it, take before and after photos. This could inspire other women your age." "You think so?" I hadn't considered that our little group might have broader appeal. "Absolutely. In fact, Lily's school project this month is about community heroes. She wants to interview you about building our kitchen and now this new group. Is that okay?" "Community heroes? I'm hardly that." "You'd be surprised," Jason said warmly. "Lily tells everyone her grandmother builds houses. She thinks you're better than those home renovation people on TV." The following week, Lily interviewed me for her school project, asking thoughtful questions about how I learned to build things, why I thought it was important for women to know these skills, and what advice I had for girls who wanted to work with their hands. "Grandma," she said as we wrapped up, "when I grow up, I want to build things like you. Mom says girls can do anything boys can do, but you actually show me it's true." Her words stayed with me as our Wise Women Builders group continued to meet each weekend, transforming kitchens and bathrooms, building decks and bookshelves, and in the process, transforming ourselves. With each project, we grew more confident, more skilled, and more connected to each other. 3 months after our first meeting, Betty's house was ready to go on the market. We gathered for a final inspection, marveling at the difference our work had made. The kitchen, once dark and dated, now had gleaming white cabinets, new countertops, and updated fixtures. The rest of the house had been similarly refreshed with paint, minor repairs, and thoughtful staging. "I never thought it could look like this," Betty said, tears in her eyes. "Roger would be so proud, not just of the house, but of me learning to do all these things I never thought I could." Diana, who had joined us for the occasion, pulled me aside. "Margaret, do you realize what you've started? These women have completely changed." Ruth stood up to her ex-husband last week when he tried to claim some of her retirement money. Helen is talking about starting a small business making custom furniture. And Betty, well, look at her. She's standing taller. I looked around at my friends, these women who had initially seemed so fragile, so uncertain, and saw the strength that had been there all along, just waiting for permission to emerge. "We've built more than houses," I said quietly. We've rebuilt ourselves. The day of the Mother's Day dinner arrived, and I found myself standing outside Jason and Melissa's front door, key in hand. I hesitated for just a moment, old habits of uncertainty briefly resurfacing. Then, I remembered Betty's words from our last meeting. The hardest part is believing you belong somewhere. Once you believe it, other people will too. I used my key and walked in. The house was filled with delicious smells, and the sound of music playing softly. I followed the aromas to the kitchen, our kitchen where Melissa was arranging flowers in a vase. She looked up and smiled. Margaret, perfect timing. I was just about to text you to come early. Is something wrong? I asked, noticing her slightly frazzled expression. Not wrong exactly, but she gestured to the oven. I tried making your famous roast with the rosemary and garlic, but I think I've done something wrong. It doesn't smell quite right. I set down my purse and washed my hands at the sink. Let's take a look. Together, we bent to peer through the oven window. The roast was browning nicely, but I could see that the vegetables surrounding it were beginning to char. The temperature's too high, I said, and it looks like you might have forgotten to add enough liquid to the pan. Melissa's face fell. I wanted it to be perfect. It's our first Mother's Day dinner, and after everything that happened. I touched her arm gently. It's easily fixed. We'll add some broth, lower the temperature, and it will be delicious. Cooking is forgiving that way most mistakes can be remedied. As we worked side by side to salvage the roast, I realized how far we'd come from that Thanksgiving, when I'd eaten alone in the garage. Here we were, collaborating in the kitchen I'd built, preparing to celebrate a day that honored both of us as mothers. I've been meaning to tell you, Melissa said as she chopped fresh herbs, how much I appreciate all you've taught me these past few months. Not just about cooking, but about resilience, I guess. Seeing you start that builders group, watching you stand up for yourself with Jason, it's changed how I think about getting older. How so? I asked, surprised by her candor. I always saw aging as this terrible decline, becoming less capable, less relevant, less everything. It scared me. I think that's partly why I pushed you away. You reminded me of what I feared becoming. Her honesty touched me. And now? Now I see there can be strength in those later years, new beginnings, even power. Melissa smiled shyly. I hope I'm half as formidable as you when I'm 68. Before I could respond, the front door burst open, and Lily ran in, followed by Jason carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers. Happy Mother's Day, they chorused. Jason handed me a bouquet of vibrant dahlias, me favorites, while Lily presented Melissa with cheerful sunflowers. And that's not all, Jason announced. We have something special to show you both. He led us to the dining room, where the table was beautifully set for dinner. In the center was a large, wrapped package. Open it, Grandma, Lily urged. You and Mom together. Melissa and I exchanged curious glances before carefully removing the wrapping paper. Inside was a handsome photo album bound in leather. On the cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "The kitchen that built a family." We opened it together. The first page held the old photograph of me in overalls, covered in drywall dust during the original kitchen renovation. The following pages chronicled the kitchen's history from its construction through the recent renovation Jason and I had completed. There were photos of family meals, birthday celebrations, Lily's first attempts at baking, and most recently, Melissa and me cooking together. The final pages surprised me most. They contained newspaper clippings about the wise women builders, including a feature article from the local paper titled, "Senior Women Tackle Home Renovation. Breaking Stereotypes and Building Community." There were photos of our group at work, quotes from Betty and the others, and even a picture of Lily visiting one of our work sites, proudly holding a hammer. Turn to the last page, Jason said softly. The final page held a certificate from Lily's school. It read, Community Hero Award, presented to Margaret Wilson for inspiring women of all ages to build, create, and reclaim their power. I couldn't speak past the lump in my throat. See, Grandma, Lily said, hugging me tightly. I told you you're a hero. That evening, as we gathered around the table in the kitchen, I had built the kitchen that had nearly been lost, and then reclaimed. I looked at the faces of my family. Jason, my son, who had learned to see his mother anew. Melissa, who was becoming not just a daughter-in-law, but a friend. Lily, who would grow up knowing that women could build whatever they set their minds to. This was what I had fought for on that painful Thanksgiving day. Not just a place at the table, but recognition of my worth, my contributions, my continuing relevance in this family and in the world. It had taken courage to stand up for myself, the same courage that had allowed me to pick up power tools as a middle-aged widow, the same courage I now saw blossoming in Betty and Ruth and Helen and Maria. As we raised our glasses in a toast to mothers everywhere, I silently thanked my younger self, the woman who had built this kitchen with her own hands, never knowing that one day she would need to fight to reclaim her place in it. That woman's strength had carried me through widowhood, through raising a child alone, through being relegated to the garage on Thanksgiving, and finally, through rebuilding not just a kitchen but a family. To the kitchen that built us, Jason said, raising his glass higher. And to the women who build kitchens, I added with a smile, thinking of my wise women builders and all the projects yet to come. As we clinked glasses, I knew with absolute certainty that I would never again allow myself to be made invisible, to be pushed aside as if my age made me less valuable. I had built this kitchen with my own two hands. I had built a new life after losing Frank. I had built a community of women who were reclaiming their power. And now, I had rebuilt my place in my family, not in the shadows or the garage, but right here at the center of the table, exactly where I belonged.